It is a pleasure to be here again. It's always a privilege to work with ISGAP in any way, shape, or form. ISGAP has revolutionized the way I teach my Holocaust literature class, and we're going to talk about that today. So I want you to think about the word memory. What is the power of memory? And I want answers. What is the power of memory? What power does memory hold? Reflection, remembrance.
Growth.
What?
Growth.
Yes, growth. I heard something over here.
It gives context for the present and projections to the future.
Context, absolutely. Context and projections. What else? Power. Belonging. Excellent.
No one can take your memory away from you.
Nobody can take your memory away from you.
Except for Alzheimer's.
Except for Alzheimer's. The pessimist.
Or historians.
Or historians, depending on who's writing. But even when the historians take away your memory, there are ways to preserve that. So how do we transmit memory, even if it's not being transmitted formally through the historians? How do we transmit memory? Old traditions, orally. Writing. What, recipes, what else? Music, art, absolutely. Yes. Yes. Remember Juju sitting here talking about the traditions that were handed down? The Libyan traditions, the Jewish traditions, and what it was like to leave her country, right? And so I want you to think about the power of memory. And I want you to think about the ways in which we transmit memory. And I want to ask you, in what way is memory a chorus? To have a chorus, you have to have what? People. You have more than one. You've got to have voices. You have to have people. You have to have more than one. To have a chorus, we need a multitude. And the multitude comprises discrete or separate parts. So there are distinctions made. The soprano does not sound like the alto. The alto does not sound like the tenor. There are distinctions made, but those distinctions work together in a beautiful harmony to create a beautiful chorus, right? A sound that we adore, treasure, love, depending on what music you listen to. So then I want to talk to you about the power of literature. Literature is something, in its most basic of forms, what is literature? If you were talking to a 4-year-old, you'd say literature is? Story. Who said that? Air 5. Yes. Literature is story. The power of story. Stories create empathy. Stories build connections. When you get to know somebody, you've been getting to know each other for a week and a half, you have exchanged stories. You didn't exchange CVs. That's not how you got to know each other. You exchange stories, incidents, experiences. And when we exchange stories, incidents, experiences, we get to know one another. And when we get to know one another, that otherness dissipates. We see the humanity that Dr. Patterson was talking about. We see the humanity behind the other, right? So the power of literature is really, really important. And for me, I use literature to fight anti-Semitism. My Holocaust literature class has become a vehicle to teach students about both historic and contemporary anti-Semitism and to motivate them to do something about it. So I'm going to take you through kind of a rough overview of how I teach my class, or what's in my class, I should say, not necessarily how I teach it, but what's in it. And then I'm going to have you do some of the things that I have my students do. So put your thinking caps on. All right. My students, most students, I would say, at my school, maybe not most, let me back that up. Some students at my school really struggle with anxiety, but that's indicative of the national norm. So 1/3 of all college students have been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. 1/3. 50% of all college students over the last 8 years suffer from some form of anxiety. And my experience bears that. I've been teaching for 24 years. Next week, when school starts on Wednesday, that's going to be the beginning of my 25th. I have never in my 24 years of teaching seen the levels of anxiety or the numbers of accommodations or the types of accommodations that I'm seeing today in the last 4 years. I have students who have the new accommodation now, which has never been a thing, is unlimited absences. You can't learn if you're not there. Unlimited absences. Like, who came up with that? Laser? Who came up with that one? Like, what psychologist signed off on that one? So I see it. I had a 19-year-old student, 19. She comes from a very affluent suburb in Boston. She attends my $50,000 per year per kid school. That's a $200,000 undergraduate education. And she said, "There's never been a generation that has suffered more trauma than mine." And I said, well, I think maybe as you move through the history, as you learn more here at Wheaton, maybe you'll see what other generations have suffered. She reported me for daring to imply that she didn't know everything. Imagine that, you don't know everything at 19. I'm 55, I don't know everything. I don't know why she thought she did. So she is emblematic of the students who are disconnected from a general framework of history. They have no reference point. They have an inward gaze. They see only them. My husband calls it navel gazing. It's like, what's in my belly button today? I can only care about my belly button. This is all I see is my belly button. That's all they do. They don't look outward and upward, right? So I'm talking about the students with that attitude, not all the incredible, wonderful students that we have, and we do have those incredible. Otherwise, we wouldn't still be in the classroom, right? We do have those incredible, wonderful students. So she's disconnected from this general framework of history, and then they're bombarded, inundated with presentism, with the media. They have a lot of media noise, they have a lot of rabble-rousing, and they hear about every injustice under the sun except anti-Semitism. Every injustice under the sun except anti-Semitism. They can't name a single anti-Semitic incident. They're shocked, they're stupefied when I do the roll call of what's happening today in our culture and in our country. I'm living in America right now. So here's what's really problematic, and here's why it's so important. Whatever your discipline is, right? We're a very interdisciplinary conference. Thank the Lord. That's what we need. We need people in political science and in history and in law and in English and everywhere else, media, doing this work of teaching students, exposing students, opening their minds, and having them recognize what's happening around them outside of their belly buttons. 20% of millennials and Gen Z. This is a U.S. Holocaust Millennial Knowledge and Awareness Survey in 2020. 20% of millennials and Gen Zers in New York believe that Jews caused the Holocaust. 20%. The other two stats are national numbers. 63% do not know that 6 million plus Jews were killed in the Holocaust. They have no idea. And 48% nationwide in the United States, they cannot name, not even Warsaw Ghetto, they cannot name Auschwitz. They don't know a single concentration camp or ghetto. Wow. I mean, I'm from another country and I knew that when I got here. I'm shocked that our students don't know these things. So it's really, really important for us to, in whatever ways we can, in whatever medium we use, we need to make our students aware of what's happening around them in terms of anti-Semitism. This is an institute on anti-Semitism. That does not mean other isms aren't important, but this is an anti-Semitism. And so that's what I'm talking about today. So ADL stats, and I'm going to give you the ADL chart in a minute. This last year, 2022, the 2023, obviously stats aren't out yet because the year's not over. There were 3,697 attacks against Jews, and this includes anything from harassment, verbal harassment, physical attack, vandalism, things like that. This is a 36% increase from 2021. So it moved up, the needle moved 36% since last year. So if you take a look here, you can see a 10-year review from ADL. 2013, 751 anti-Semitic incidents. 2022, 3,697. Wow. Why is it going up, not down? So are we measuring our effectiveness by those numbers? Because if those numbers are going up, what are we not doing? Or what do we need to do more of? How many more people need to come to ISGAP, right? How many more people need the knowledge? So for me, it's really, really important to use literature because that's my field. I'm not a political scientist. I'm not one of those teachers who purports to put on the poli-sci hat. I don't know poli-sci, I'm not gonna teach it. Or put on the, I can't put on the math hat, that's for sure. Right? I'm going to stick to what I know. I stick to my area of expertise, as Bill spoke about. And when I don't know, I refer my students to the people who do know. Go ask Dr. So-and-so. That's not my field. One of my favorite authors happens to be my husband. And so in one of his books, he says here, literature uses the language of all the five senses to create its own images and with them a kind of proxy experience. What is a proxy experience? You were talking about it at the beginning when you talked about the power of story. Intermediate.
Learning vicariously.
Yes, learning vicariously. It's a similitude, right? And so it's as if you are experiencing it yourself. So to learn by proxy experience, literature immerses you. Literature offers students a quiet space, not a safe space, a quiet space for immersion and reflection, for escape and for learning, for empathy and for synergy. Literature does that. That proxy experience allows them to enter the world of the other and to feel what the other feels, and then to be motivated by that to do something. So we also have our Forrester here, Two Church for Democracy, and he says, what is wonderful about great literature? So qualification, right? Great literature. Not all literature is great. Just like not all food is great, right? A McDonald's hamburger is very different from a steak at the Crown. What is wonderful about great literature is that it transforms, changes the man who reads it toward the condition of the man who wrote it. There's that proxy experience. You enter into someone else's world through the proxy of the literature. So literature is powerful, poetry especially. If you're like, I don't know literature, I don't teach books, you can teach a poem in any class. In any class, you can rock a poem. And you can teach so much history through one little poem. Trust me, talk to me if you want to know how to do it. It's a powerful thing to do with your students. And so I also want to talk about Louisa Rosenblatt. And so she says, a poem or a play, she's talking about literature, embodies stimuli toward a special kind of intense and ordered experience. An intense and ordered experience. Sensuous, intellectual, emotional, out of which social insights might arise. Social insights. She also says, commenting on Shelley, personalized Shelley. I had this feeling that Shelley was right. The poets are the legislators of mankind, unlike, Plato, who wanted to kill all the poets, because they change, they influence other people's imaginations. We talked about imagination last week. I had this feeling that somehow literature could fit into my belief that one could do something to help the world or change the world. And isn't that what we want from our students? We want to change this narrative that is propagating anti-Semitism in whatever country, whatever culture in which we live. And so I want to talk about why I use memoir, memoir. I teach Holocaust literature not through fiction. I teach it through memoir, the power of memory. And so there is not a controversy, but there's a debate in the teaching of Holocaust literature. Is it okay to teach fiction? Is it okay to teach, fact only, or what should we do? And so I wanted to share a couple of responses to that from a critic with you. So volunteer to read this first quote aloud. Thank you.
There is one domain of literature, however, where that freedom and the idea of willing suspension of disbelief cause trouble, and that is Holocaust fiction. Readers would be all too willing to disbelieve the horrible world that Holocaust literature depicts, but no serious author would aim at suspending that intuitive disbelief. The horrors may be almost beyond one's imagination, yet they were part of reality, and readers should always be aware of that.
Thank you. So we talked earlier about how we need to suspend disbelief, right? When we're reading, that's how we enter the fiction. But so the argument here is, well, if you're entering fiction about the Holocaust, you're suspending disbelief. Are you really understanding the atrocity, the level of atrocity, the level of trauma? Are you really understanding that if you're just kind of, well, this is fiction, so it couldn't have been that bad, right? And so for me, that's why I teach memoir. I don't have issue with anybody who teaches Holocaust through fiction, but for me, I want to teach it through memoir because students need to know what really happened. It's a proxy experience. It's not fictional. It's a proxy experience in reality. And so we see here also, who else wants to read? This side of the room. Yes, Janice?
No wonder that Holocaust fiction has long been a contested genre. We all know Adorno's famous dictum that to write a poem after Auschwitz is barbaric. But for our topic, a somewhat less well-known statement by Elie Wiesel is of greater relevance. A novel about Treblinka is either not a novel or not about Treblinka. A novel about Majdanek, am I saying right? Mm-hmm. Is about blasphemy, is blasphemy.
So here's Elie Wiesel, past president of ISGAP. I mean, Nobel Prize winner. If you don't know Elie Wiesel, Run, Don't Walk, at least pick up Night. And after Night, read All Rivers Run to the Sea. And he says for him, it's blasphemy. right? It's not a novel. It's either not a novel or it's not about Treblinka. It cannot be fully transmitted in fiction. So 2 different views, and I'm not advocating one or the other than to say that for me personally, I find memoir the most effective way to teach students about the history of anti-Semitism. It's not just about the Holocaust, and we'll look at that in a second. Jews have been persecuted since the beginning of time, right? It wasn't this one-time thing that happened in World War II. It's the longest hatred, as we have heard multiple times. And so for me, the power of the book. And how do I teach my class? How do I structure my class within the power of the book? I teach them terms. I teach them Naya's tropes. Where's Naya? If you read the assigned reading for my lecture, then you read an article by Naya. And you had her lecture on tropes last week. So I teach them the tropes. That's really important. I teach them the history. I've often had students say, we tag courses at my college with a history tag, a philosophy tag, a literature tag, a global perspectives tag. And my students are always saying, why isn't this class tagged with history? Because they get a lot of history in my class. Art, films, lots of secondary readings. My poor students, the secondary readings were, light until my first year at ISGAP. And then there was an avalanche of secondary readings. I backed up a dump truck of information and dumped it on my students. But I'll tell you, you'll see the responses at the end. My anonymous end of term spots, my evaluations, you'll see what they had to say. They did not complain about the dump truck of information that they received. So ISGAP really empowered me and gave me the tools and the material to help my students understand what is happening in the world today when it comes to anti-Semitism. Question? No. Oh, interdisciplinary studies. I use an interdisciplinary approach, right? So I'm using not just literature, but I'm using film, I'm using music, I'm using history, I'm using other disciplines to teach my course. So I want to remind you of what Naya taught you last week. And so when we talk about tropes, first one, upper left, what trope is at work in that cartoon? A+. Everybody gets to go home early. Just kidding. What trope is at work in the bottom right-hand corner? You got Naya. Do you see how well you taught them?
I do. I'm so proud.
What trope is at work here? Well, greedy. Yeah, wealth, greed. Yes, you guys learned well. And so it's not just teaching the term or the trope, it's praxis. It's putting students in conversation with the material so that they can then activate the knowledge, right, and apply it. So I wanted to remind you of those tropes. Now, in case you forgot all of them, there they are for you. Or just go back to the notes you took from Naya's lecture last week, or read the article that I signed that Naya wrote. So when I talk about the history, I start with history. They're always shocked, like, oh, wow, it wasn't just World War II. So these are not even all of the major persecutions against Jews. These are just some. So if you go BC, B/BCE, 1750, 722, 586, 332, 168 through 164, 63. That's just BC. Look at AD. And Aaron's going to talk to you. Aaron did a great presentation last year on anti-Semitism in early church history, like how that came about. And he's going to do another fantastic presentation for you tomorrow on Christian nationalism and how it's connected to anti-Semitism. So Aaron is an expert on Christian anti-Semitism. I learned from him. I bring him into my classes to teach my students because I'm not the expert on that. So I know to go to the people who do know and bring them in so that my students can benefit. That's a lot of persecution. And when I say persecution, I mean burnt, I mean expelled, I mean attempted genocide. Every country they've been in, they've been expelled from. And they can't have that little strip of land called Israel. Nobody even wants them to have that. But they're kicking them out of everywhere else too, and have been since 1750 and earlier. So I just want to, when I do this, I actually have the incidents next to each date. But that'll take like 12 slides and we don't have that time today. It's like a multi-week class. But I want you to know that if you want the incidents, email me and I'll send you like the list of what goes with each date. So I contextualize it for them with the history. They learn the tropes, they learn the terms, it gets contextualized with the history. And this is the overlying framework for my course. I teach about Germany in the 1920s and what happened after World War I and how the mark was so depressed and how inflation was so high and what set the stage for someone like Hitler to come in. Like everybody always says, how could Hitler have risen to power? Well, go back and look at what happened after World War I and, all the sanctions against Germany. I talked to them about how the Nazis took power, like the, incremental steps that led to that. The defining of a Jew, the Nuremberg laws. Like, how do others define Jews versus how do Jews define themselves? We were at a brain trust in LA in May, and one of the big questions was, what is a Jew? What is a Jew? How does a Jew identify? The escalating violence, the pogroms, the Kristallnacht, all of those things. Then we look at the people who said we were only following orders. And we look at the psychology of that. And then we look at the Jews who resisted. Because you hear, well, why didn't they just fight back? They did. They did. And so we go through a lot of literature, factual literature about, and we're doing this while we're reading the memoirs. This is not independent of, this is in conjunction with. This is adjunct reading. And then we look at bystanders, the people who stood by and did nothing. And then we look at rescuers, the people who intervened. And I have a book for every one of those. And so I will share those with you. I begin by showing them a documentary called The Last Days. It is really, really old. I encountered it in 1999, which was my first year of teaching. And I've been playing it every year since then. And if you've never seen it, it's very powerful. And it follows the story of 5 Jews who survived the Holocaust, one of which became a congressman in California. He just died recently. It is a powerful, it's story. It's the power of story.
Is it Lantos?
Yes, it's Lantos. Is it Peter? Thomas Lantos. Yeah, Tom Lantos. I don't think it's a book. It was, yeah, Spielberg's documentary. So he puts these, it's not like a movie, it's interviews with these survivors, and they are so poignant and powerful. My students cry. They've learned almost nothing, and they're already crying because they're so moved by the testimony. This one woman had to, diamonds her mother gave her, and she had to keep swallowing them and then defecating them and then swallowing them to hide them from the Nazis. I mean, it's like powerful things. So I start with that, and then, of course, the seminal book, Night. You cannot teach a Holocaust literature class and not have Night somewhere near the beginning. I call Night the skeleton, and I call All Rivers Run to the Sea the flesh on the bones. So this is Elie Wiesel's award-winning book. It is absolutely fantastic and phenomenal. We're going to do a little practice with it in a few minutes. And so how was it possible that men, women, and children were being burned and that the world kept silent? And the world knew, right? There were people who knew. And so then I go to All Rivers Run to the Sea because even though it's a lot of reading and there are a lot of pages in that book, students need to read it. Elie Wiesel, it is religion, it is philosophy, it is history, it is everything. It is humanity. He is a brilliant, beautiful writer. His prose is absolutely stunning. And he's a brilliant thinker. I had the privilege of studying under Dr. Alan Berger when I received my master's degree. My master's thesis was on how to teach Holocaust literature, and I studied with Dr. Alan Berger, and he was good friends with Elie Wiesel, and one of the coolest things he did was he had Elie Wiesel come in to class, and another time, I wasn't in class that year, I missed that, but the year I was with him in class, he did a phone call in it was before Zoom, so Elie Wiesel phone called in and did a speakerphone conference, and I was like, Elie Wiesel on the phone. So if you've never read Elie Wiesel, Run, Don't Walk. And if you read only one, let it be Night. And if you can read 2, let it be All Rivers Run to the Sea in addition to that. Then I take them to Primo Levi, Survival in Auschwitz. This is very different in style from Elie Wiesel, but also an incredibly powerful testimony of what it was, and to how to maintain your dignity while you are being treated as if you are inhuman. So highly recommend that. Even in this place, this camp, this concentration camp, one can survive, and therefore one must want to survive to tell the story, to bear witness. That's literature. Literature is bearing witness, especially memoir. It's bearing witness. And look what he says, to save at least the scaffolding, the form of civilization. We have devolved into so uncivil a culture. We are so discourteous to one another. We think that if we disagree, that the other person is evil. We don't realize that we can respectfully disagree with one another. I don't have to believe what you believe, and you don't have to believe what I believe. We can make distinctions. I can respect your right to have your own opinion, and I would hope I would be afforded that same respect back. But we don't live in that culture or that space anymore. We're being shouted down. And it's problematic. And so I think reading memoir and teaching Holocaust literature in order to combat anti-Semitism is one of those ways that we bring that civility and that discourse back to the humanities and to the culture in general. Then I have them read Gerda Weissman Klein, so they see from a woman's perspective what it was like to go through the concentration camp. This is a phenomenal memoir. They're all phenomenal. That's why I have them on the list. It was very hard to narrow the books down. All but my life. And so, but here is not being used as a coordinating conjunction. It's being used as a preposition. It means what? But means, as a preposition, it means except. Yes, good job, all you grammar school people. All except my life. You could write a 20-page paper just on the title alone. What does that mean, all except my life, all but my life? And so she says survival is both a privilege and a burden. See the dichotomy there? It's a privilege to survive, but why is it a burden? Memory. Transmit the memory. But to do so causes what? To transmit a memory of Holocaust camp? Re-inflict trauma on yourself, right? So you're going through trauma, you're reliving trauma. Highly recommend that book. I then take them to The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. True story, amazing story. If you've never read it, run, don't walk. So Corrie ten Boom was a Christian woman from a Christian family in Holland, and her family loved Jews, hid Jews, went to concentration camps for hiding Jews. And she says about Jews, about the Nazis persecuting the Jews, she says, they have touched the apple of God's eye. We don't make distinctions anymore about Christians. We do overgeneralizations with Christians. We would never say all black people are X or all Jewish people are Y, but we say all Christians are Z. Oftentimes I hear in around my culture, not at Wheaton because they're all Christians, but like at, when I go to literature conferences and whatnot. And we forget to make distinctions, that there are as many sects, S-E-C-T-S, of Christians as there are fingers and toes that you have, and more, right? When I talk to the expert, Aaron is in the back of the room. And so there are all these different branches of Christianity, and they have wildly different beliefs. And actually only, out of the 50 million people who are supposedly evangelical, only 4% of that 50 million actually really identify and believe what evangelicals believe. Only 4%. But we lump that 4% into this big pot of a bunch of crazy Christians who do wacky things and say wacky things and appropriate things, right? And we forget to make distinctions. So I want to talk a little bit about that Christianity, the kind of Christianity that loves Jews, not for any other reason than that they are the apple of God's eye. And so where does Corrie ten Boom get some of that from? Here we see the Samaritan story that Bill was talking about early, and he's talking to the woman, and she's like, worship on the mountain, worship in Jerusalem. He's like, no, that's not the point. And he says, Jesus replied, salvation is from the Jews. We forget, we leave out all the stuff Jesus said about honoring the Jews, about homage to the Jews. You can bad Christians can misinterpret the Bible a lot of ways. They can misuse scripture a lot of ways. Bad Christians do that all day long. There are people who are religiously abusive. Even within Christianity, they're abusive to one another, and you certainly have seen the abuse to Jews, right? We've certainly seen that. And you'll see more of it when you hear Aaron go tomorrow. Stay tuned. Lots of stuff coming. So Christians have a tortured history when it comes to their complicity in what has happened to Jews. But there's another type of Christian. There's a type of Christian who reads the whole Bible, places it in context, and understands the honor that is due to Jews. It has nothing to do with end times. I'd never heard, last year I heard somebody say, Christians like Jews only because it's something about fulfilling end times prophecy. I'd never heard that. I've been a Christian for 20-something years. And then I think somebody said that Christians say and I've read this the other day, I was doing some research. Some Christians believe you're not a complete Jew unless you accept Christ. And I'd never heard that either until last year. So I'm a Christian who'd never heard those terms. I've just always loved Jews and Judaism. I do have 2%. But I before I knew I had 2%, I always had an affinity for Judaism and for Jews. It was just always there. And so, because Jesus is not saying all Jews are children of the devil, is absolutely not what he's saying. they're having a whole conversation, and it starts in John 8:31. So you have to go all the way back to John 8:31 if you really want to contextualize that. And he's talking to the Pharisees, a very specific group of people. He's not saying all Jews. So we're going to do an exercise with figurative language and how that works out. And you can see one of the beautiful things about the Bible is how literary it is, right? Especially the Jewish Bible. It is so beautiful and poetic and literary. So they're saying, we are Abraham's descendants. And he says, I know that you are Abraham's descendants. He's not saying you Jews are children of the devil. He's talking to a specific group of people who have a specific agenda. They've made that agenda really clear to him. And those Pharisee type people are in every religion and in every culture. It's not a Jewish thing. There's plenty of that. There's plenty of that in Christianity. Trust me. I've been, I've experienced it. There's a lot that bad Christians can take out of the Bible and misuse. But I also want to remind you that make the distinction between the Christians who are not that way and the Christians who do not read the Bible that way. And I also wanted to talk to you about Christianity and slavery. I write a lot about slavery. It's one of my areas of expertise. And as a Christian, I'm really interested in how could you be a Christian and be a slave owner, right? I just finished a chapter for a volume on Phyllis Wheatley. And that's a perfect example of how is it that these people are Christians and then owning this slave. This little 7 or 8 year old girl is a slave. I want to remind you, as horrible and as bad and as wicked as all the Christians were who supported slavery, who owned slaves, I want to remind you that it was also the Christians who fought for abolition. It was the Quakers who began that fight. It was people like William Wilberforce, and here he is, who said, so enormous, so dreadful, so irremediable did the slave trade's wickedness appear that my own mind was completely made up for abolition. Let the consequences be what they would. And he had consequences. I, from this time, determined that I would never rest until I had effected its abolition. Remember affect, effect. One is a noun, one is a verb. Don't confuse them. One is result, one is influence. And so there were people like him, there were people like Hannah More, there were people like Granville Sharp, there were thousands of Christians who were not slave owners and who did not support slavery and who did the opposite. They laid down their lives to fight for abolition. So there's always another side. We have to make distinctions. We can't overgeneralize, not with Jews, not with blacks, not with Hispanics, not with Christians, not with anybody. And so that's why I bring, even when I'm not teaching in a Christian school, I taught in a secular school for 23 of my 24 years. I'm sorry, for 20 of my 24 years, 4 have been at Wheaton. I always use the hiding place, even in secular schools, because I want students to learn about the good kind of Christian, right? Not just have only one type of Christian in their minds. So the hiding place is powerful for that. And then I kind of move into documentary type books. I move out of the memoir. I give them an edited volume by Dr. Berger and his wife, Naomi. It's a wonderful volume. It's the stories of children of Holocaust survivors and what it was like growing up in that home with those silences. Like they knew something, but they didn't know what the something was. And so what was that like for them? And there's an incredible section where Dr. Berger also interviewed children of Nazis. And how do those children of the Nazis feel about what their parents did versus how do the children of the survivors feel about what their parents experienced? One Holocaust survivor in this book said he would not be in the book if Dr. Berger was going to include children of Nazis. He was like, I will not. I want nothing. I don't even want to be in a book with them. Imagine the pain. Imagine the pain that incites that statement, right? Provokes that statement. So this is an incredible anthology if you want second generation voices. This is one of my favorite books, Antisemitism and Its Metaphysical Origins. The first time I read it, I couldn't believe he was going to be at ISGAP after I read Dr. Patterson. I felt the same way about David Burns. Like all of my author heroes are at ISGAP. I'm such a nerd, I make them sign my books. It's like, please sign my book. So this is, and if you want to talk about the numinous, the anagogical, which we'll go to in a minute, then I highly recommend this book. I make my students read it. I added this book in last year. I learned about it here at ISGAP last summer, so I added in Jews Don't Count by David Baddiel. It's one of the most, if you could teach only one book about contemporary anti-Semitism, well, that's hard. You have to teach 2. It has to be contemporary, this Jews Don't Count and woke anti-Semitism, have to be 2. But before I read woke anti-Semitism a couple months ago, this would have been the one. It's funny and it's factual and it's powerful. And then, of course, I discovered woke anti-Semitism and just annotated every page. It was so useful in terms of the framework for what is happening with anti-Semitism. Because remember, this book is not saying other isms are not valuable or worthwhile. Not that they're not worthwhile, and not that they're not worth fighting. That's not what this book says. This book is talking about anti-Semitism. And again, ISGAP is about racism in general, but specifically about anti-Semitism, right? So that's the narrative that needs to be centered at ISGAP. Anti-Semitism, because that's what we're here to learn about. Doesn't mean other narratives are not important. And so I then just discovered this book, I think in January, Noah Tishby's Israel. If you don't want to sign the whole book, assign the chapter on land rights. It is factual, it is fascinating, she's funny, it's a quick read. Dr. Patterson and I were talking about this in LA, and I said, you've got to read this book. He had heard of it. Did you read it yet? Detention.
Not yet.
Detention. You have 4 days. And this, I take 2 chapters out of this book. I don't assign the whole book. I learned about it from Haras last year, Islamism and Islam. And it's very powerful, making the distinction between Islam and Islamism. We do this with Muslims, right? Haras made great distinctions for us between Islam and Islamism, and we need to remember to make those same distinctions with other people, other races, other religions, etc., other genders, whatever it might be. So highly recommend the chapters on Islam and Islamism. I can't remember what number chapters they are, but if you email me, I'll grab my file and let you know. And then, because it's a Christian school, I have them read Israel Matters by Gerald R. McDermott. He is a wonderful author who talks about why you need to support Israel, right? Like, why is it important? So for Christians who are clueless and don't even know, or for Christians who aren't clueless but are anti-Zionist, this book is a good tool to help them connect the dots and kind of open their minds to a very different historical perspective. And then, as I said, I bring in the expert. I want my students to learn about the anti-Semitism that was rampant in the church, and in many cases still remains rampant in the church. And so I bring Aaron in to talk to my students. They're absolutely riveted. He's a wonderful speaker. He's a wonderful storyteller. He teaches through story, again, the power of story. And my students are transfixed, and they are horrified to learn. Like, I remember the first time I found out Martin Luther was a Semite. Oh, yeah. What? My mind was blown. And my students react the same way. Right? And so he is fantastic. I bring him in, and I bring in a few other people. I wanted to leave you with, before we do a little exercise, I wanted to remind you of what the good Christians are like. So here's Elie Wiesel in All Rivers Run to the Sea. And Bill, you have a brilliant speaking voice. Would you please read for us?
Dear Maria, if other Christians had acted like her, the trains rolling towards the unknown would have been less crowded. If priests and pastors had raised their voices, if the Vatican had broken its silence, the enemy's hands would not have been so free. But most of our compatriots thought only of themselves. Barely was a Jewish house emptied of its inhabitants, and they descended like vultures on the abandoned possessions, breaking into closets and drawers, stealing bedsheets and clothing, smashing things, looting. For them it was a party, a treasure hunt. They were not like our Maria.
Excellent, A+, thank you. Somebody please read the second passage. This side of the room. Thank you.
I think of Maria often with affection and gratitude, and with wonder as well. This simple, uneducated woman stood taller than the city's intellectuals, dignitaries, and clergy. My father had many acquaintances and even friends in the Christian community, but not one of them showed the strength of character of this peasant woman. Of what value was their faith, their education, their social position, if it aroused neither conscience nor compassion? It was a simple and devout Christian woman who saved her town's honor.
Thank you. Beautiful reading, both of you. Thank you so much. That's the kind of Christians need to strive to be. That's the kind of Christians you have sitting in the room here with you. You have at least 4 or 5 of us here with you. We're your allies. There are more than one type of us. I think this is probably a common trope in teaching. I think you saw it yesterday, but you're going to see it again. So what is this? It's the tip of the iceberg. So when I teach students literature, I teach them the text on the page, the black and white letters, the black letters on the white page. That's the tip of the iceberg. And in order to get beneath the surface of the prose, you need some scuba gear. And the scuba gear I call SIFT. And so SIFT stands for symbols, imagery, figurative language, tone, and theme. And if you teach them the fundamentals, the elements of literary analysis, the most basic levels, symbols, imagery, figurative language, tone, and theme is not topic. Topic or subject can be stated in 1 or 2 words. Theme is not, you can't say the theme is love. No, it's not. That's topic. Theme is what the author says about the topic. It's a sentence. At the least, it's a sentence. So we don't confuse topic and theme, right? Topic is what is it about? Theme is what is the author saying about the topic, right? What is the message to the reader, to the world? What's the moral of the story, so to speak? So we put on our scuba gear, we put on our SIFT gear, and we dive beneath the surface level of the prose, and we go looking, we go digging, we go mining for the treasure to see what is the author really doing or saying here to the best of our ability based on the text, because you don't want to descend into madness and start imposing things on the text that aren't there. And so I think you probably, some of the literary people in here will probably know Dante's 4 levels of interpretation. It's just one way of viewing literature. It's not the only way. It's not necessarily the right way. But I did want to talk to you about this way because I want you to be able to do something with this in a little bit. There's a literal level. There's what you see on the page. Like it says what it says and that's it. It doesn't go beyond the surface. There's that level. Then there's the allegorical level. This is the truth beyond the words on the page. What is the text pointing to? What greater truth is it alluding to? That's the allegorical. Then there's the moral. And so what am I supposed to do? What am I morally moved to do now? What action am I moved toward because of this thing that I read? And then we have the final and the highest level. Who in here knows what it is? You can't say it because I know you know. The anagogical. What is the anagogical?
Where it's headed, it's the sort of beyond.
Yeah, the beyond. It's the numinous. It's the spiritual. It's the something greater than myself, something outside of myself. And so Dante wrote the Dante's Inferno. Everybody knows Dante's Inferno, Divine Comedy. And so think about what it actually says. What is it pointing to? What am I moved to do? What action am I moved to do? Remember our quotes from Forster and Rosenblatt talking about Shelley, right? And Martin. What is the literature moving us to do? And what does it mean? Does it take me outside of myself and lift me up to something that is numinous? Where I start thinking about humanity and maybe even God, if I believe in him, right? So let's do a little bit of practice. I need a reader, and then I'll tell you what to do. Who wants to read? Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Never shall I forget that night, the first night in the camp that turned my life into one long night, 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the small face of the children whose bodies I saw transformed into smoke under a silent sky. Never shall I forget those flames that consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget the nocturnal silence that deprived me for all eternity of the desire to live. Never shall I forget those moments that murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams into ashes. Never shall I forget those things, even were I condemned to live, as long as God himself. Never.
Thank you. I want you to find these devices in the text, and I will go through them. A metaphor, I know you know these, but in case you forgot, because it's been a long time, I'll just review them quickly. Zeugma, it's my favorite literary device. Everybody say it, zeugma. Zeugma. How fun is that word? It's a verb that changes meaning based on the object. It has 2 objects, and the object changes the meaning of the verb. He stole both her car and her heart that fateful night. Verb stole 2 things, the car and her heart. She fell in love with a car thief. Go figure. Girls like bad boys. I don't know why. So that's a zeugma, and we know what an active verb is. It's a verb that's doing something. It's not a linking verb, like is, am, are, was, were, being, been, or be. Let me move on. I want you to think about the power of that passage that you just read. Yeah? Powerful, no? Yeah. I want you to compare it with a passage from a textbook. It's a wonderful textbook. I love the textbook. I assigned the textbook. I love the author. But I want you to see if this verbiage would have the same impact on you or on a student as what you just did with Elie Wiesel. So who wants to read that out loud? Dr. Patterson, go.
Inquiring into the history, nature, and meaning of the Holocaust, one is struck by the fact that the irrational scheme for eradicating the Jewish people was undertaken in a technologically efficient, bureaucratically competent, and rational manner, thereby demonstrating the enormous gap between skills and values in modernity.
Thank you. Are you feeling that?
A little bit.
Are you feeling that like you felt Never Shall I Forget? The moments that murdered my God and my soul? Right? There's a difference between that dry, seemingly dry, I think it's really important, I assign it, that seemingly dry text. This is, you read this if you read the three, I signed only 3 articles because I remember what it was like to have all those readings. I assigned only 3. One of them was Holocaust's Watershed by Dr. Alan Berger from his book Crisis and Covenant, and this is that an excerpt, a pericope from that chapter. So there's a difference, especially think like an 18 to 22-year-old. Which one is going to move you? You're scholars. Which one is going to move the 18 to 22-year-old? The first one is going to have more of an emotional. Who talked about emotion? Wasn't that yesterday? Like you have to infuse emotion. You have to have pathos if you want to engage your students or engage your listener. And then I use art. This is done by a Holocaust survivor. It's called One Spring. And I teach visual rhetoric, so I give students the principles of visual rhetoric, basic principles of visual rhetoric, and I have them do some analysis on art by Holocaust survivors. Here's another piece that I use. This is a really powerful piece. Students actually saw stuff in this last semester that I didn't see. They blew me away. They really went deep and found some amazing symbols in there. So way to like bring into an interdisciplinary approach into your classroom whenever possible. I bring in poetry. This is Night Over Birkenau by Borowski. I'm not going to read it because we're running super low on time, but I want you to just look at the first 2 lines and the last 2 lines. Night again. Again, the grim sky closes, circling like a vulture over the dead silence. I'm going to the end. Like God's judgment on the corpse of the earth, fog descends over Birkenau. Powerful poem by a survivor. And this is in translation, but so poetry is always, like I said, you can do a lot with a short little poem. And then I have students, I tell them this, one of my assignments is at the very beginning of the semester, I say, decide which book as you're reading you're really resonating with and keep track of words and phrases that are important to you or that move you. Because they have to create a found poem. So a found poem is when you take words and phrases from different places in the book and you put them together to make your own poem with the author's words. And so this is one of my students' found poems, and experts in the room, my Holocaust literature teachers, are not allowed to answer because they know from the first sentence. Well, you all know because I just made you do the passage, right? Which book it came from. At the end of the poem, they have to put the word or the phrase and the page number they got it from so I can double check that they're not cheating, that they're not making stuff up. So I want you to I'll read only the first part of it so that you can see how the student has cobbled together things from different places in order to make meaning. Never shall I forget. Ahead of you lies a long road paved with suffering. We stood shivering in the darkness. I was nothing but a body, and I hated that body. Why do you cry when you pray? Heavy silence. The shadows around me rouse themselves, torn from their dreams. Work makes you free. Mm-hmm. This is all from different places in Night. It's all over the book. And the thought process that occurs in students as they put this together moves them so deeply into empathy.
Wait, what is this assignment? It's very interesting.
I call it a found poem. It's I'll send you the.
No, but can you tell us the methodology? So
you tell them in advance because you don't want them to have already read the book and not gathered the words and phrases that they like. Uh-huh. And you tell them to gather words and phrases that move them or that are poignant or powerful, that interest them, because they're going to, at the end, put them all together with their own creativity into a poem, right? Wow, and so it's not my idea. It's something I learned. So I was fortunate enough to do my bachelor's in English education, and then I did a master's of arts of teaching. So I have a lot of really good pedagogy because I was trained well, and that's one of the things I learned in my training. And so that's the second part of her poem. We're not going to go through it. I just want to show you what students are capable of if you set them free. I do also want to talk about, I learned from SUNY. I had no idea there was an anti-Semitism problem in the Black community until I listened to SUNY 2 years ago. No clue, completely clueless. So again, another area where ISGAP informed me. And so I now bring that into, yes, I am Black, but I'm not like I still think everybody needs to know, like, there are good and bad people in every single race and in every single culture. There are good Black people, there are good white people, there are bad Black people, there are bad white, etc. So to act like any one given race is a set of perfect, innocent human beings who've never done anything wrong is problematic for me. So SUNY taught me about Black America's anti-Semitism problem, and so I also teach my students about it. But before I do that, remember I said distinctions? Show both sides. I talk about what the Black-Jewish alliance was like in the civil rights era. And this is 1963 American Jewish Congress fundraising event. Blacks and Jews used to work together. And these are the freedom riders, interfaith freedom riders, who were arrested in their peaceful civil rights protests. So before I go to here's the bad part of the Black community when it comes to anti-Semitism, I show them the alliances, right? But I don't shy away from showing them also what is true. You heard about the Black Hebrews, I think from SUNY this session, this Summer Institute. So I wanted to play a very short clip of what Jews are experiencing on the streets.
Why don't you feel good about that?
Why don't I feel good about what Kanye is saying?
Both of them and Kyrie, what they got going on?
Well, I'll talk mainly about Kanye.
Right, what about Kanye? Why you don't feel good about what he's saying?
And he's praising...
You're half Jewish.
Yes, and he's praising Hitler, saying the Nazis were cool, and saying the Holocaust didn't happen.
Yeah, no, we support Hitler.
Right. All of you?
Yeah. Because Hitler was killing your people, and Hitler knew who the real Jews was. Right? Hitler wasn't oppressing my people. He was coming for your nuts. Right? And if you get a wake-up call, man, you're not a Jew. You're not Jew, right? You're the seed of the devil, man. Right? These brothers on these platforms, Kanye and Kyrie, shaking things up. It's because it's a great awakening happening. Right? The real Jews are back on the streets. And these so-called fake Jews who stole our identity are going to go into slavery. Because you're not a Jew, right?
Did the Holocaust happen?
It did happen, and we glad that it happened.
So that exists. New York. So that exists, and I think Janice and I were talking the other day about how radical some of the Black Hebrews can get. That's not all Black people, right? So don't make the synecdoche error, right? I'm showing you what does exist, but it's not for everybody, but it does exist, and we don't need to shy away from it. I'm not going to play this whole video, but you need to watch it on your own. It's a 10-minute video. It was produced by ISGAP. It is phenomenal. I play it in every class I teach. I also, in the education department, teach a class called Teaching Diverse Learners. It teaches future educators how to teach diversity, how to deal with diversity in their classrooms. And I show this video to them too, and they are absolutely stupefied when they see it. So I'll show you about the first minute or two.
I don't want to waste any time. I asked the question, who are the real children of Israel? And I'd like to answer it right away.
Yeah, they did a great job.
Like any good lawyer in a courtroom, he tells you what he's going to prove. And then he goes ahead and proves it and let the jury make the decision. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad has said that Almighty God, Allah, revealed to him that the Black people of America are the real children of Israel. And we are the choice of God. And that unto us he will deliver his promise.
We are living in a moment.
And so the Wills back there, or at least one of them, produced that. And it really is a powerful 10-minute video. It's very short and it's very good. So I highly recommend that you at least watch it, even if you don't show it to students, because it's informative. So what are my students' responses after they have read all these memoirs and they watch something like that? Who would like to read Angelina's response? Thank you, Naomi.
The blatant anti-Semitism of the Nation of Islam's leader is both shocking and illogical. Because Jews are racialized as white in the U.S., the existence of the Sephardic Jews of North Africa and Spain, the Mizrahi Jews of the Middle East, and the Jewish people of Ethiopia, Sudan, and other African nations the latter of which Farrakhan would consider his fellow brothers and sisters, are completely overlooked and undermined. Ethnically black Jews, who Farrakhan would consider his own kin, are absent from the narrative. It is a shame that the majority of black American hip-hop culture, which is a major influence on youth culture, is deeply entrenched in such a hypocritical and heinously evil narrative.
Isn't she phenomenal? Love that girl. She got it. She really got it. All right, so I won't read you what Jessie says other than to say it broke her heart, right? And she wants to do something about it, bring more awareness and foster hospitality and peace. I'll give you a second to take a picture. The reason the font is so small is because these are screenshots of discussion board posts, and I whited out their last names, even though they did give me permission to share their work. So let me run through this. I wanted to end with a positive note, like where Jews and blacks are working together. There's a Jewish philanthropist who has gone into Africa, and he has founded a youth village modeled on orphan communities in Israel, and he is edifying and helping.
It's a woman.
It's a woman. Are you sure it's a woman?
Who passed away, yeah.
Oh.
I was actually there.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have the article. If anybody wants it. Thank you. And I show them Schindler's List. I was going to play you the video clip, but I'm not going to do that because we're out of time, but I will summarize it. It's the end of the movie where they've made him a ring, and he receives it, and he's leaving. He's saved all these Jews to the best of his ability, and now he's running away. He's got to hide because the Allies are going to come for him because he was pretending to be a Nazi. In some ways he was a Nazi. And he starts looking around, and it hits him all of a sudden that if he had sold a car, he could have saved 10 more Jews. If he had sold the pin, it has gold, I could have saved 2 more Jews, 2, at least one at least. And the enormity of the Holocaust hits him, and he did so much, but for him, he didn't do enough. He could have sold more. It is such literally my students are sobbing at this point, and this is not till the end of the semester. After it's been layered and layered and layered into them. They are sobbing because now they get it. Now it's not just a movie. And it's a true story. We know Schindler's List is a true story. So goodbye, Schindler's List. My students at the end of the course, this is what they had to say. These are my anonymous spots. There was not a single thing that I read in this class that I thought was dumb or inapplicable. I dropped so much on them, it's scary. I would have dropped my class. They read a lot. One student said, I thought about dropping because your syllabus was heavy, but I'm so glad I stayed. I loved all the insightful materials. Everything was so valuable, important. I attained a factual, emotional, personal, deep theological understanding of the Holocaust through the course readings and lectures, blah, 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 blah. You know why? ISGAP. That's why. ISGAP prepared me to teach my class in a way that made it make sense for my students, that moved the needle, to move that 36% increase in anti-Semitic incidents, that there will be more young people fighting back. One student emailed me over Christmas break, so excited because she was telling her mom all about everything she had learned, and her mom was excited about learning it too. Each one teach one and change the world. This student, his name is Tim. This was his end of semester reflection. He says, as a Christian, it is important for me to raise awareness of this oppression as a legitimate issue. This is a Christian, because Jews constitute the lineage of God's chosen people. Although I differ in beliefs from Jewish people, Israel is God's chosen nation with which he makes an everlasting covenant. Therefore, the historical significance of Jews as God's chosen people, as well as their identity as the most oppressed group, beckons us as Christians to help raise anti-Semitism to the same level as other isms, even when identity politics does not. That's the power of literature. So what I was going to have you do, Elie Wiesel says he's duty-bound to tell these stories. Memory, transmit the memory. I want to know what our duties are. I want you to just think, we don't have time to write, what's one personal or professional duty that you think is imperative in the battle against anti-Semitism? 10 seconds. What's one thing you think is super important, personal or professional, that needs to be done?
Stand up.
Stand up.
Speak truth.
Speak truth.
Protect the discussion.
Yes, excellent, Nathan, yes. I was gonna have you turn and talk, but we don't have time. And then I wanted you to go around the room with your turn and talks, and I wanted you to start by we must, da-da-da-da-da, we must, da-da-da-da-da, we must, da-da-da-da-da, we must, da-da-da-da-da, and the da-da-da-da-da was your personal or professional imperative. The end.